in the heart of Hertfordshire, where the river Mimram weaves silver threads through meadows and the air hums with elderflower in spring, lies the village of Tewin. Its cottages, cloaked in ivy and warmed by centuries of hearth fires, stand as sentinels along narrow lanes. At the village's edge, St. Peter's churchyard slumbers beneath the shadow of an ancient yew. Its gravestones weathered to whispers, their names softened by rain and time. Among them, one monument refuses to fade, the altar tomb of Lady Anne Grimston, a grave that breathes with a life of its own, entwined in roots and rumour. In Tewin, stories are as much a part of the land as the soil itself, and none are told with more reverence or dread than Lady Anne's. The tale is kept alive by folk like old Meg, the village herbalist, whose gnarled hands and sharp eyes have tended Tewin's ailments for decades. Meg's cottage, tucked beside the churchyard, is a trove of dried herbs and whispered secrets. Children cluster at her hearth on winter nights, wide-eyed as she recounts the legend, her voice low and rhythmic, like the pulse of the earth. But in the spring of 1710, the story was no legend, it was a wound still fresh. Lady Anne Grimston was a figure of awe and unease in Tewin. Born into wealth, she ruled Tewin House with the poise of nobility and the intellect of a scholar. Her gowns shimmered like moonlight, her laughter rang through the manor's halls, but her eyes, grey as a winter dawn, held a sharpness that could silence a room. She was generous, yes, endowing the church and feeding the poor, but her charity came with a distance, as if she stood apart from the world's hopes and fears. Unlike the villagers, who clung to prayer and trembled at tales of restless spirits, Lady Anne believed only in what she could see, touch, or reason. God, resurrection, the afterlife. She dismissed them all with a wave of her hand and a smile that bordered on scorn. She thought herself wiser than the Almighty, old Meg would later say, shaking her head. And the earth don't forget such pride. Among the villagers was Thomas, a young stonemason whose hands shaped the churchyard's graves with care. He was quiet, devout, and haunted by a childhood memory. His mother's death, her grave marked only by a wooden cross that rotted too soon. Thomas poured his grief into his craft, believing each stone he carved was a promise of rest for the soul beneath. He admired Lady Anne's wit, but feared her blasphemy, and when she spoke of death as an end, absolute and final, his heart sank. Yet he held his tongue, for who was he, a mason with calloused hands, to challenge a lady of her stature? As Lady Anne's health began to fail in the winter of 1709, Tewin buzzed with unease. She was not old, barely past 50, but a fever had taken root, sapping her strength. The villagers watched Tewin House, its windows glowing late into the night, and whispered of omens, owls hooting at noon, a frost that spared every garden but hers. On the eve of her death, as a storm rattled the village, Thomas was summoned to the manor. Lady Anne, pale and frail, but with eyes still fierce, lay in her bedchamber, the air thick with the scent of wax and sickness. "Thomas," she rasped, her voice a shadow of its former clarity, "when I am gone, build me a tomb. A grand one, stronger than any other. Let it stand forever, proof that I need no resurrection." Thomas hesitated, his hands tightening round his cap. "My lady, no stone can outlast the will of God." She laughed, a brittle sound that turned into a cough. "If there is a God, let him prove it. If there be life after death, let a tree spring from my grave. Should that happen, I would believe." Her gaze pinned him, daring him to argue. "But it won't. And you'll see I was right." Thomas left the manor shaken, the weight of her words pressing against his faith. Lady Anne died that night, February 12, 1710. As the storm broke and the wind howled through Tewin's lanes, the village mourned, but their grief was tinged with fear. Her final words, overheard by a maid and spread like wildfire, felt like a challenge to the heavens themselves. Thomas set to work on the tomb, pouring his skill and sorrow into every chisel stroke. The altar tomb was a marvel, heavy marble slabs, polished to a gleam, bound with iron clamps forged by Tewin's blacksmith. It stood beneath the church tower, grander than any grave in the churchyard. Its edges carved with ivy and roses, symbols of eternity, though Thomas knew Lady Anne would have scoffed at the gesture. The villagers watched, some in awe, others muttering that no stone could hold a soul so defiant. "Mark my words," said old Meg, stirring a pot of chamomile by her fire, "the earth don't abide a heart that denies it." Years passed, and chewing settled into its rhythms. Thomas married, raised a daughter, and grew grey at the temples, but he never forgot Lady Anne's tomb. He tended it as he did all his works, brushing away leaves and checking the iron clamps. At first it stood flawless, a monument to both his craft and her will. But the earth, as Meg had warned, had its own plans. It began with a crack, so faint Thomas thought it a trick of the light. A hairline fracture, snaking across the tomb's northern slab. He ran his fingers over it, frowning, and told himself it was the frost's doing. But the next spring, a sapling, an ash, slender but unyielding, pushed through the crack, its roots curling like fingers beneath the stone. Thomas stared, his heart thudding. He thought to uproot it, to preserve the tomb's perfection, but old Meg stopped him. "Leave it," she said, her eyes glinting in the dusk. "It's her wager, not yours. Let the earth answer." The ash grew, and soon a sycamore joined it, their roots entwining as if in alliance. Year by year, the trees pressed against the marble, splitting slabs, twisting iron, and lifting the tomb's edges, until it seemed the stone itself was breathing. The clamps groaned and snapped, one by one, and the once imposing monument became a cradle of wood and earth. The villagers, who had once admired the tomb's grandeur, now avoided it, crossing themselves as they passed. Children dared each other to touch the trees, but none lingered long. Old Meg, now bent with age, took to sitting by the tomb on quiet evenings, her shawl drawn tight. "A tree from the grave is heaven's judgment," she'd murmur, her voice carrying the weight of truth. "The soil remembers, even if the heart forgets." By the time Thomas's daughter, Eliza, was grown, the tomb was a marvel and a mystery. The ash and sycamore stood tall, their branches tangling with the church tower's shadow, their roots embracing the broken marble like lovers. Eliza, who had her father's quiet faith but her mother's curiosity, often visited the grave, sketching the trees in a small book. She'd heard old Meg's stories and her father's memories of Lady Anne, but to her, the tomb was neither curse nor miracle. It was a question, one the earth was still answering. One spring, a stranger came to Tewin, a scholar named Master Godwin, with ink-stained fingers and a satchel of books. He'd heard of Lady Anne's tomb from a traveller in London and came to see it for himself, drawn by tales of a grave that defied both stone and skepticism. He questioned the villagers, scribbling notes, and spent hours by the tomb, measuring cracks and sketching roots. Eliza, wary but intrigued, watched him from a distance. "You're the mason's girl, aren't you?" Godwin said one afternoon, catching her near the churchyard. What do you make of this place? A miracle or mere chance? Eliza hesitated, her sketchbook clutched to her chest. It's neither, I think. It's a promise kept. Lady Anne asked for proof, and the earth gave it. Godwin raised an eyebrow, his quill pausing. And you believe the earth speaks for God? I believe it speaks, Eliza said simply. What you hear depends on your heart. Godwin stayed a week, but left with more questions than answers. His notes, later published in a slim volume, called The Tomb, a curiosity of nature, but Tewin's folk knew better. They saw the trees grow stronger each year, their leaves whispering in the wind, and they felt the weight of Lady Anne's wager, a challenge met, a truth undeniable. Today, the altar tomb of Lady Anne Grimston stands as it has for centuries. Cradled by the ash and sycamore, their roots and branches a living monument. The marble is fractured, the iron rusted, but the trees endure, their trunks thick and their leaves a vibrant green. Visitors to Tewin churchyard step lightly, their eyes drawn to the grave that would not rest. Some see a miracle, others a warning, but all feel the pulse of something greater. A silent sermon carried on the rustle of leaves. Old Meg is long gone, and Thomas's stones have crumbled, but Eliza's sketches, passed down through generations, still circulate in Tewin. The villagers tell the story as they always have, with reverence and a touch of fear. And for Lady Anne, who denied the resurrection with her final breath, the earth offered its own reply. A grave that breathes, a tomb that lives, proof that even the hardest heart cannot silence the truth. So if you walk through Tewin's churchyard, pause by the tomb. Touch the bark, feel the stone, and listen to the wind. The resurrection waits for no skeptic, and for Lady Anne Grimston it came all the same.